Fame and power can bring out the weirdest parts of a person.
Famous people are weird as shit. They're all weird. Your suspicions are correct.
And if they start out weird to begin with, watch out. From rock stars to race car drivers to actual royalty, these famous folks are some of the strangest people we've ever seen.
Old Hollywood is synonymous with class, sophistication, and images of matinee idols chastely stealing kisses on the silver screen. In reality, though, all sorts of bonkers nonsense was going on behind the scenes. Here's a look at some classic film stars who were actually really weird people. In 1960, the editors at Good Housekeeping magazine got a strange call. Cary Grant, the suave, sophisticated film star who almost never gave interviews, was on the line and wanted to talk about the magnificent amount of LSD he'd dropped. Yup, plagued by personal demons, Grant finally found peace when his third wife introduced him to the wonders of acid, which he dropped over 100 times between 1958 and 1961. And he wanted everyone to experience the same wonderful benefit. So he went on a campaign to promote the benefits of LSD, which, according to the biography Cary Grant, A Touch of Elegance, included Grant saying things like, "It releases inhibition. You know, we are all unconsciously holding our anus. In one LSD dream, I shit all over the rug and shit all over the floor. Another time, I imagined myself as a giant penis launching off from the earth like a spaceship." Sold.
I don't know, sir, but it looks like a giant dick.
Yeah.
Oh my God, it looks like a huge...
Pecker!
Oh, where?
It's not a woodpecker, it looks like someone's...
Privates! We have reports of an unidentified flying object!
Most people who get nose jobs want to make their nose smaller, but legendary writer, director, and actor Orson Welles was obsessed with making his nose larger. He thought his real nose was too small for his round face, so in every movie, he had a fake nose made. And as his career went along, those noses got bigger and bigger and bigger. When he finished a film, Welles kept his noses, named them, and stored them in his Hollywood home, where he would occasionally take them out at parties and perform magic tricks with them. That's the sort of crazy you get away with when you've directed the best film ever made. In one of the most famous cases of a star having a secret weird side, Joan Crawford was outed by her adopted daughter Christina as a jealous egomaniac in the infamous memoir Mommy Dearest, which was later turned into a hit movie. An account of her time as Crawford's ward, it made the Hollywood star sound like the mother from hell. Among other tidbits were harrowing descriptions of the physical abuse Crawford occasionally unleashed on her children, the revelation that Crawford lied when she told Christina her birth mother was dead, and of course the famous meltdown over wire hangers. Some claim the book wasn't entirely true, but considering Crawford was so weird, she once sabotaged her own movie in order to spite rival Bette Davis. Separating truth from fiction is nearly impossible. The star who gave us Dr. Strangelove and Inspector Clouseau wasn't just a weirdo. He was apparently also such a monumental butthead that few could stand to be around him. Peter Sellers would have screaming meltdown tantrums on set. He'd freak out at his wives, smash crockery, and threaten them with his shotgun. He'd even get low-level people fired on movies as a way of venting his frustrations against people like producers and directors who were more powerful than he was. He was also profoundly superstitious. So when director Vittorio De Sica told him the color purple represented death, Sellers took it way too literally. According to the biography Mr. Strangelove, Sellers became convinced the color purple could kill. He refused to be in rooms with it and would have screaming tantrums if he came into contact with it. Elizabeth Taylor's hell-raising is so infamous that her private life was publicly denounced by the Vatican. Over her lifetime, she married 8 times, had endless affairs, and took great pride in the offense she caused. Sometimes her behavior was truly outrageous. After marrying and divorcing Richard Burton twice, Taylor was so upset that she got engaged just to spite him. While working on the play Private Lives, Taylor and Burton brought out the worst in each other. They separately turned up drunk, they broke character, they skipped performances. When Taylor missed a show, Burton got fed up, went to Vegas, and married Sally Hay. When Taylor heard the news, she was so furious, she announced her engagement to Victor Luna, upstaging Burton. Not that she hated her ex-husband. Later in life, Taylor claimed they would have married a third time if only Burton hadn't died. The best way to describe Katharine Hepburn is fiercely independent. She lived as if married with both women and men, all while acting like it was no big deal. Part of that, though, was that she had plausible deniability, as according to the book Kate, the woman who was Katharine Hepburn, the famed actress not only didn't like physical intimacy, she hated nudity to the point where she would walk out on a film if there was a scene showing someone naked. So why did Hepburn loathe nudity and physical romance so much? According to a college friend, she tried intercourse once and, quote, just didn't like it. Fair enough. They say that cleanliness is next to godliness, but matinee idol Clark Gable took it to a whole new level. According to Warren G. Harris's biography of Gable, the star shaved his chest and armpits because he didn't like sweating. He also didn't like baths because it meant soaking in your own dirty water. So he always showered, even carrying his own portable shower around with him when he was in the Army. Considering his obsession with hygiene, it's ironic that Gable's Gone with the Wind co-star Vivian Leigh later publicly called him out for having bad breath. Still, no matter what people said about his weird ways, he always had the perfect comeback.
Frankly, my dear, I don't give a damn.
Throughout our country's history, many of the men who ultimately served as President of the United States have had some pretty unusual facts attached to their biographies. Here are 7 US presidents who were really weird people. Here's something that could only have happened in the age before the internet and smartphones. According to many reports, our 6th president, John Quincy Adams, had a thing for skinny dipping, and he'd often go for a quiet dip in DC's Potomac River at around 5 a.m. to help him deal with the stress of being president. Adams' love for nude swimming was actually well known among the press, so journalist and convicted public nuisance Anne Royal was able to secure her history-making interview with Adams by taking his clothes until he agreed to answer her questions. Strangely enough, Adams was not the only president who loved to take his clothes off and go for a dip. Among the others, according to the New Republic, Teddy Roosevelt, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, Lyndon B. Johnson, and perhaps less surprisingly, John F. Kennedy.
Happy birthday, Mr. President.
According to a New York Times article published all the way back in July of 1912, Grover Cleveland actually had to execute multiple murderers by hanging while he served as the sheriff of Erie County. At one point during his term, a young Irishman named Jack Morrissey was convicted of killing his mother, and Cleveland surprised the community by announcing that he would actually go through with performing the execution. Much of Cleveland's motivation was due to the fact that he was sick of people passing off the difficult task of executing murderers to the office's deputy sheriff Jacob Emmerich, whom the public had nicknamed Hangman Emmerich, much to Emmerich's dismay. After performing Morrissey's execution, Cleveland was reported to have been sick for several days, but he did not shirk further execution, which paid him $20,000 a year, or about $350,000 in today's cash. In 1969, Governor of Georgia Jimmy Carter, along with 24 other witnesses, claimed he saw an unidentified flying object during a visit to the Lions Club in Leary, Georgia, calling it the darndest thing I've ever seen.
It changed color, and then it stayed there for a while, and then it disappeared into the distance. And none of us could ever imagine what it was, and I still don't know what it was.
Carter filed a report on the incident 4 years later and made UFO research a component of his successful presidential campaign in 1976. Carter later backed off on the platform of releasing UFO information to the public, saying that it would be a threat to national security.
I give you our 39th president, Jimmy Carter.
Oh, come on! He's history's greatest monster!
Plenty of people resort to alternative medicine to stay healthy, but Calvin Coolidge may ultimately take the cake. According to the sleazy-sounding book White House Confidential, our 30th president, quote, enjoyed having petroleum jelly slathered on his head every morning while he ate breakfast in bed.
Gasoline, the Wonder Jelly. Guards against the wind, smooths away the sun, takes a bite out of burns, soothes chafing on the run.
The reason? Coolidge apparently believed that slapping on a bunch of jelly would be great for his health. To be fair, this is also around the same time that cocaine and morphine were considered perfectly okay as over-the-counter medicines too. Our 35th president may have been one of the most charming and good-looking presidents in U.S. history.
He was a hyper-charismatic, telepathical knight, JFK.
But behind closed doors, John F. Kennedy was battling multiple illnesses and used just as many drugs to treat them. Kennedy's secrets were uncovered by Professor Robert Dallek's book, An Unfinished Life, John F. Kennedy. Reportedly, Kennedy suffered from colitis, prostatitis, Addison's disease, and osteoporosis of the lower back, among other things.
By the time he was 17 years old, his health was so questionable, they sent him off to the Mayo Clinic in Rochester, Minnesota, to try and figure out what his problems were.
According to Dallek, Kennedy frequently took drugs ranging from codeine to Ritalin and a thyroid hormone, often taking as many as 12 medications at once, and more during times of stress. Shockingly enough, despite Kennedy's overflowing medicine cabinet, he was mostly able to keep his ailments private from the public, which seems almost absurd nowadays. It's hard to choose one detail to focus on when discussing the strange predilections of JFK's successor, Lyndon B. Johnson. Do we talk about his car, which was also a boat? Do we talk about the fact that he was reportedly obsessed with his manhood and allegedly nicknamed it Jumbo? Maybe we'll discuss his habit of holding meetings while he was on the toilet, as described in numerous articles and books. In Flawed Giant, Lyndon Johnson and His Times, presidential historian Robert Dallek explained that his abuse of aides, shouting at them in public and calling them into the bathroom while he sat on the throne, was well known to reporters. Considering how much time he seems to have spent hovering over water, it's starting to make sense why Johnson loved to drive an amphibious car. If you thought those other presidents were weird, wait until you hear this crazy secret. You'd think that the S in Harry S. Truman stands for something, like Stanley, or Stephen, or Stephanie, or something. But you'd be wrong. In fact, it's just S.
Put it down as best you can, okay?
What's the shape of the snake letter look like?
You don't know what a S looks like?
S. Oh.
First ladies are expected to be the model wives and mothers of America, but that can be a tall order to fill. More than a few first ladies spent their husbands' times in office in unusual ways. With that in mind, these first ladies were actually really weird people. Lyndon and Lady Bird Johnson were engaged just 10 weeks after meeting, but even that wait was almost too much for Lyndon, who had proposed to her during their first date. Their honeymoon in Mexico involved so much physical intimacy that when Lady Bird got back to the States, the first thing she did was see a gynecologist. Normally a routine examination before marriage, she neglected to make the appointment in the rush to the altar. But given her husband's notorious appetite for women, the exam more or less made sure that she could even handle the future president's constant advances. But no doctor could help her with her husband's wandering eye. According to Texas Monthly, Lyndon liked women, and he didn't care if his wife was around while he liked them. However, his political career meant he couldn't afford to divorce her, and she knew it. But that didn't stop Lady Bird from modeling herself on a woman her husband had a decades-long affair with. She copied her clothes, makeup, and jewelry, all in the hopes her husband would stay interested and stop sleeping around. The weirdest thing about Pat Nixon is that she was married to Richard Nixon. He was a rude, standoffish individual, whereas everyone seemed to think Pat was the greatest woman who had ever lived. As soon as she arrived on the world stage when her husband became vice president in 1953, organizations threw awards at her for just being the best. According to Parade, Pat was named Outstanding Homemaker of the Year in 1953, Mother of the Year in 1955, and the Nation's Ideal Wife by the Homemakers Forum in 1957. Pat was so popular that when Richard ran for president in 1960, his campaign pushed the slogan "Pat for First Lady" and put it on everything from buttons to bumper stickers. She was also in the top 10 of Gallup's yearly poll of most admired men and women in the world 14 times, including the 4 years immediately after her husband resigned in disgrace. Eleanor Roosevelt is famous for a lot of things, but during her lifetime she was controversial, not just for her actions or political views, but also because she basically became a supermodel. It might sound crazy, but according to the Washington Post, advertisers were climbing over each other to sign her as a model for their brands. Roosevelt advertised everything from hot dog buns to mattresses. Congress was none too pleased when they realized what the First Lady was getting up to in her free time. They even went so far as to launch an inquiry. But Eleanor shut it down when she revealed that almost all the money she made from her pitchwoman career went to charity. That made it a little hard to be mad at her, and the inquiry was dropped. Jackie Kennedy was the perfect First Lady. She was poised and beautiful and comfortable around power. According to the book Jackie, Janet, and Lee, she was raised this way from the beginning. She and her sister Lee learned from their mother to be thin and pleasing to men, rich men in particular. So Jackie married a future president, while Lee married a Polish prince. But there were serious rivalries between the two women. Writer Gore Vidal swears Lee slept with John F. Kennedy repeatedly while he was married to Jackie, and that the First Lady knew about it but was too proper to make a fuss. After John's death, Jackie let a respectable amount of time pass before marrying Greek shipping magnate Aristotle Onassis. There was just one problem. Onassis had been Lee's boyfriend for 6 years. Lee had introduced the two, and they went behind her back and made a marriage of convenience for both of them. Then Jackie didn't even bother telling Lee what was happening. Instead, it was Onassis who called his girlfriend, told her he'd decided to marry her sister, and said he'd love it if she came to the wedding. Lee did come, but the sisters' relationship was completely destroyed. And Jackie stuck the knife in again at the end, leaving nothing to Lee in her will. Julia Tyler wasn't John Tyler's First Lady, but when her predecessor died and she married into the job, she decided she was going to use it to make herself famous. According to the National First Ladies Library, shortly after her marriage, Julia commissioned a flattering etching of herself wearing expensive jewels and a fancy dress. She then had it mass-produced and available for sale so anyone could have the joy of looking at her. Tyler was the first known First Lady to try and get her name in the papers on her own merit. She befriended reporters and made sure there were constant descriptions of events she went to. There's even some evidence that she may have handed out these press releases rather than just waiting and hoping a reporter would cover her.
James Madison's wife, Dolly, would prove to be one of the 1800s' biggest party animals, and while it might seem silly now, throwing huge shindigs like she did was a little taboo at the time. Every week, she hosted her so-called Wednesday night squeezes and invited everyone from politicians to celebrities to shoemakers off the street.
Dolly wanted to include a true cross-section of her countrymen.
By the end of the day, it was like, the more the merrier.
On top of that, she also tended to dress a little provocatively at her soirees. Dolly Madison might not have been the first society woman to live in the White House, but she was perhaps the busiest. Of all the first ladies, Mary Todd Lincoln is perhaps the most famous for being odd. After losing 2 of her children, she turned to spiritualism, as she was sure that their ghosts showed up at the end of her bed every night and were trying to contact her. Her seances were led by a variety of mediums and took place at the White House, and President Lincoln attended at least one of them.
On an endless journey of wonder and discovery!
Amazingly, if Lincoln had listened to the warnings of one medium, he might have escaped his fate. Ordinarily, telling a president people are out to get him might be worth a shrug, but Charles Colchester had more reason to know the truth than most people. He just so happened to be drinking buddies with John Wilkes Booth, who wasn't shy when it came to talking about his desire to harm Abe. Forget ethereal spirits, it was the sharing of earthly spirits that might have saved him. After her husband's untimely passing, Mary Todd became even more into her rituals, attending a spiritualist commune for a few days. She eventually visited a famous ghost photographer who superimposed an image of her late husband behind her, but made it look like his spirit was lingering around her, just as she would want. When it came to the occult, Florence Harding was all in as well. She grew up surrounded by people who put hexes on their barns to ward off evil spirits. So when she got to the White House, she hired a clairvoyant to sniff out anyone in the administration who was out to get her husband.
In addition to her belief in mediums, she also bought into homeopathy.
When she had a kidney issue, she was so impressed with her treatment that she had her husband bring her doctor to Washington and appoint him as the official presidential physician. This would prove fatal, however, when that medic misdiagnosed President Warren G. Harding's heart attack as mere food poisoning, and the flub cost him his life.
You idiot!
Betty Ford might have become First Lady suddenly due to the resignation of Richard Nixon, but she wasn't going to let her new role cramp her style. She was a true child of the 1970s, no matter what her real age, and she indulged in many of the fads. This involved wearing a mood ring and dancing around the halls of the White House. She even spoke in radically modern terms about people using marijuana and having premarital relations, and she wasn't shy when it came to talking about her progressive political positions.
I think I'm a feminist, really.
The Equal Rights Amendment is a necessity of life.
But her biggest cliché 70s thing was using a CB radio. In 1976, the First Lady was dealing with chronic arthritis and couldn't join her husband on the campaign trail, so she got her own license and campaigned for him through the CB. Her handle was Big Mama. Of course, despite her quirks, Ford is perhaps best known for her very candid experience battling addiction, which led to the foundation of the Betty Ford Center and made her name forever associated with alcohol recovery efforts. Nancy Reagan came from Hollywood, so it is not too surprising she brought some strange habits to Washington. But instead of following fad diets or signing on to ad campaigns, she picked up astrology, and she picked it up hard. What had been a mere pastime became an absolute obsession after Ronald Reagan was shot.
From then on, she had her astrologer plan virtually every event in the president's life in order to keep him safe, even though she only ever met her once.
I timed most of the speeches. I timed when he would take Air Force One, when he would take off, and when he would land.
Nancy tried to hide her reliance on the controversial calendar maker by paying through a third party, but the public still found out, and she was mercilessly mocked for the rest of her life.
Hey, I didn't want to get into a Nancy Reagan thing about, doing any seances.
Sometimes when you live your life cooped up in a palace, you start to believe that you swallowed an entire musical instrument. Some of these royals had mental struggles, while others were just bucking societal norms, but all of them exhibited rather strange behavior. If she lived today, Princess Isabella of Parma would be just another liberated woman, but things were a little bit different in the 1700s. The limited marriage market for royals often led to disasters, but Crown Prince Joseph of Austria struck gold when he fell head over heels for his young wife. Alas, Isabella was less interested in him, and it may have been because she was a lesbian. According to the book A Treasury of Royal Scandals, she became obsessed with her husband's sister, Christina. She sent her letters that said things like, "I am told that the day begins with God. I, however, begin the day by thinking of the object of my love, for I think of her incessantly." Isabella was also unusually well educated for the time, and she was openly hostile to the idea that she existed just to have kids. Nevertheless, she was pregnant quite often. This reportedly made her depressed and obsessed with the belief that she was going to die, which she did, of smallpox at the age of 21. There will almost certainly never be another British royal like Prince George, Duke of Kent. Before World War II, there was still plenty of reverence for the Windsors, and the newspapers covered up George's indiscretions, which there were plenty of. He was known for being the smartest and most attractive of his family members, as well as running with a fast crowd and enjoying fast cars. He also had a penchant for drug use. His older brother, the future King Edward VIII, reportedly had to wean George off morphine and cocaine after he became seriously addicted. George married his second cousin, Princess Marina of Greece and Denmark, and by all accounts, they genuinely loved each other. But that didn't stop him from sleeping with plenty of other people, male and female. And since he lived during a time of unreliable birth control, it's believed that he fathered numerous illegitimate children. George's longest extramarital affair may have been with the composer Noel Coward. They weren't exactly discreet about their 19-year affair, as the British security services reportedly knew all about them walking the streets of London dressed like women. George's hedonistic life ended in 1942 at the age of 39 when he died in a mysterious plane crash.
Conspiracy theorists have suggested that he was in fact assassinated. But why?
Maybe Gian Gastone de' Medici, Grand Duke of Tuscany's life would have been different if his marriages weren't so terrible. The union was arranged by his father, and it was doomed from the start. His bride, Anna Maria, was a widow with no desire to marry again, and the 26-year-old Gian was undeniably gay. Within 2 years, they were living almost entirely apart from each other, and Gian didn't exactly spend his time constructively. He ran off to places like Prague, where his lover would find poor students to frolic with the Duke in exchange for cash. He also got drunk and fought in seedy taverns and lost much of his money playing cards. Eventually, Gian had to come back to Florence and take over for his father. But instead of ruling over his people, he spent most of his days in bed, where he would entertain various young men and women. He would occasionally leave his room for official dinners, where he would get so drunk that he vomited in front of the esteemed guests. This went on for almost a decade until he died in 1737 at the age of 66. There are plenty of reasons to feel bad for Marie Louise, granddaughter of France's King Louis XIV. Start, her mother basically ignored her from the moment she was born. She was married off at 14 and got pregnant 5 times over the course of 10 years, with all of those babies dying. Marie also reportedly had a disturbingly close relationship with her father, Prince Philippe II of Orléans. It started when she was 6 and had a life-threatening illness. After she recovered, she and Philippe were inseparable. He visited her for hours every day during her first pregnancy, and rumors spread that they had an incestuous relationship. It probably didn't help matters when he painted her in the nude. Furthermore, the princess was reportedly a raging alcoholic. Her other vice was gambling, and she lost obscene amounts of money in single games. She would also throw scandalous dinners and invite her priest so that he could see everything she was doing so that she wouldn't have to go to the trouble of confessing to him.
It seemed to be a good idea at the time.
If you lived in northern Italy during the 14th and 15th century, you were probably bending the knee to the Visconti family. They consolidated their power through tight friendships with popes and various royal marriages. In 1412, Filippo Maria Visconti took over from his brother Giovanni, who had been assassinated. That might sound like a scary start, but Filippo actually did pretty well for himself at first. He reorganized government finances, introduced the silk industry, and waged successful wars against his neighbors. He eventually died of natural causes in 1447. But according to the book A History of the Italian Republics, Filippo was so cartoonishly ugly that he couldn't bear to have people look at him. He hid in his palace and never showed himself to his soldiers. And when an emperor came by for an important peace talk, he refused to meet with him, as he instead spent much of his time as a recluse. Germans don't exactly have a reputation for being spontaneously passionate in the bedroom, but there are often exceptions to any stereotype. And if police files uncovered in the Prussian secret state archives are to be believed, the German royal family got up to some freaky stuff in the late 1800s. Princess Charlotte was the sister of Kaiser Wilhelm II, so she was very well connected. In 1891, she invited a group of aristocrats, the Kaiser's brother-in-law, and a member of the government to a secluded hunting lodge. They drank, danced, and participated in a series of orgies. Afterwards, someone sent the attendees blackmail letters that included descriptions of their behavior along with helpful illustrations. Historians believe that the scandal-loving Charlotte sent the threats and that she might have invited the people in the first place just to entrap them. The controversy resulted in one person being arrested and another being killed in a duel. Meanwhile, Charlotte got off scot-free. As of 2024, Princess Sri Rasmi of Thailand is still alive, but she's never going to become queen, as her ex-husband, Maha Vajiralongkorn, divorced her before he ascended to the throne. But that fate couldn't have been too much of a surprise to her, considering that she was his third wife.
Her family is under a cloud of scandal and corruption allegations.
Before they broke up, they lived an interesting life together. This was perhaps best illustrated by their relationship with their poodle, Fufu, whom they seemed to be weirdly obsessed with. Opponents of the then prince released a video of a bizarre party that they threw in 2001. Sri Rasmi was completely naked except for a G-string, while plenty of courtiers watched. She even got down on the floor and ate cake next to the dog. The video caused a sensation, but not in Thailand itself, where there are strict laws prohibiting saying anything bad about the monarchy. Sri Rasmi didn't get custody of Fufu in the divorce, though the dog's weird journey was far from over. He was made an Air Chief Marshal, and after he died, his funeral lasted 4 days. Countess Elizabeth Bathory was the niece of the King of Poland, and she was also reportedly one of the most notorious sadists of all time. When she was young, her uncle taught her about Satanism, while an aunt instructed her in the pleasurable side of pain. By the time she was 15 and married off to a Hungarian nobleman, her dark personality was already well established. She asked her new husband to build her a torture chamber to her exacting specifications, and he delivered. The Countess then proceeded to torture her servant girls. She stabbed pins under their fingernails, or she'd tie them down, covered them with honey, and left them to be attacked by insects. Eventually, she moved on to abducting peasants and then even the daughters of nobles. Elizabeth believed that human blood would keep her young and healthy, and she would do things like bite off chunks of the poor girl's flesh. Her connections protected her for a long time, but eventually she was tried for 80 counts of murder. She was ultimately convicted and locked in a windowless room where she died 3 years later. Spanish Crown Prince Don Carlos never ascended to the throne, though his life did inspire the story of a famous opera. He had it tough from the very beginning, as he was born with serious physical deformities. Among other things, he was hunchbacked, and one of his legs was much shorter than the other. As he grew up, he developed slower than he should have, both mentally and physically. This might have something to do with the fact that his family was so inbred that he only had 4 great-grandparents instead of the usual 8. Don Carlos's mental problems led to serious behavioral issues. When he was just a child, he developed a propensity for hurting animals and girls. He once maimed more than 20 horses and was also known for roasting rabbits.
What's the matter?
Oh, there's a rabbit in there!
Don Carlos also enjoyed whipping women, some of whom were paid off afterwards. He would reportedly attack anyone, with his victims including servants, court officials, and a cardinal. He even once made a cobbler eat a pair of boots that he decided weren't good enough. Don Carlos's behavior only got worse after he suffered a head injury, as his tantrums became infamous at court. So it was hardly a shock that he never found anyone who would marry him and that he died before he could produce an heir. Princess Alexandria Amalia's Bavarian family was well known for their mental struggles. Her father was famously eccentric and liked to write poetry about the most bizarrely trivial things. Meanwhile, her nephew Ludwig II was obsessed with building castles to the point that he basically bankrupted the country. As for Alexandria, when she was young, she was reportedly obsessed with cleanliness. She would only wear white so that she could see any dirt that got on her. Then, one day, when she was 23, she was walking around her family's palace on tiptoes and moving sideways through doorways while avoiding touching anything. She then told her family that she'd just discovered that as a child she'd managed to swallow a full-size grand piano made of glass. She also believed that it was still inside her, so she needed to be careful that it didn't break. Weirdly enough, Alexandria wasn't the only noble in history who thought they were made of glass. It was such a popular delusion that it appeared in medical books and plays. Contemporary psychologists think it might have been a way for powerful people to express how they felt fragile in their important roles. Research about 18th century Korean Crown Prince Sado has posited that he suffered from bipolar disorder. His symptoms included depression, anxiety, suicidal and aggressive behavior, and feelings of delusion that began when he was just 13. He also exhibited signs of obsessive-compulsive disorder. According to Korea, a historical and cultural dictionary, when Prince Sado went off on an unauthorized pleasure trip, his enemies at court told the king what his son had been up to. The allegations included tales of assaulting palace women, seducing nuns, and killing eunuchs, among other horrible crimes. When Sado returned, his father ordered him to kill himself by drinking poison. The prince refused, but the king wasn't finished, as he also ordered that his son be confined without food or water in a rice chest, where he died 8 days later, most likely of dehydration or possibly of starvation. According to The Guardian, you could call Elizabeth II's grandmother, Queen Mary, a kleptomaniac. She would go to people's homes and straight up steal stuff. Royal Babylon says her technique went something like this. She'd pop by her house and see something she'd like. Instead of making conversation like a normal person who'd come to visit, she'd just stare at whatever object she wanted for a long time. This was the first warning sign. If you didn't get the point, she'd sigh and loudly say something like, "I'm caressing it with my eyes."
Precious.
If she was the queen, you'd probably give in and offer whatever it was to her as a present. But what if it was a family heirloom or something else you couldn't bear to part with? Then she'd just have to take it without you noticing. When people realized what she was doing, they took to hiding anything they thought she might take a shine to before she came over. She countered by showing up unannounced. The antique dealers of England had it bad as well. Queen Mary was known to stop by, take whatever she wanted, then forget to pay for it. Eventually, her stealing got so bad her assistants were on high alert, and if they found out later she'd managed to sneak something into her purse, it was returned with a note that there had been a misunderstanding. Empress Elizabeth ruled Russia in her own right and was the aunt-in-law of Catherine the Great. Someone with absolute power can do anything she wants, and what Elizabeth wanted was for her court to cross-dress. The issue was that Elizabeth thought she had fabulous legs, but the style of the day, big hoop skirts for women, meant she couldn't show them off. Men's clothes, on the other hand, had breeches and tights that exhibited their form. Since she was in charge and didn't want to be the only one who looked different, Elizabeth would throw huge balls where everyone had to cross-dress, or else. According to St. Petersburg and the Russian court, 1703 to 1761, the young Catherine actually enjoyed these parties, but she and the Empress may have been the only ones. Men's clothing wasn't flattering on all women, but it was the men who really had it bad. To go from the form-fitting clothing they usually wore to giant hoop skirts meant they had no idea how to maneuver their huge bulk while walking, let alone dancing. They were also expected to wear women's hairstyles, which meant enormous wigs. With a change so drastic, accidents were bound to happen, like when Catherine was knocked over while dancing and fell under a man's hoop skirt. Perhaps not surprisingly, the cross-dressing balls ended when Elizabeth died. Queen Nzinga of present-day Angola had a lot on her mind. She was busy fighting the Portuguese for most of her rule, managing to hold them off for 40 years. During this time, she also had needs, so she pulled together a harem of hot guys. In an odd twist, she made them dress like women, but maybe it made sense since she was strutting around looking like a man. But Nzinga didn't have time to go to her harem and decide who to sleep with each night. So according to Harvard's library collection, she devised a workaround. Every night, 2 dudes would fight to the death, and the queen would bed the winner. Then the next day, she'd execute him. At 75 years old, she decided she wasn't cut out for this anymore and disbanded her harem. But that doesn't mean she ditched everyone. From Eve to Dawn, A History of Women in the World says that she married one of her youngest wives, which makes her a serious cougar and a queen to be reckoned with. Queen Victoria of the United Kingdom was completely obsessed with death, and lots of important people in her life died when she was in charge, including her mom, her daughter, and most famously her husband, Prince Albert.
Will you marry me?
After he died, she declared the longest period of mourning in memory, and this is back when a random uncle dying meant you had to wear black for at least a year. Victoria never fully recovered from her grief and wore widow's weeds for 40 years until her death in 1901. And that's not all. Victoria also regularly took cocaine and opium, according to Beardy History, but those were legally available at the time. You can't compare today's illegal drug use to what used to be basically prescription medication. But Queen Victoria did dabble in some more controversial stuff, namely chloroform. Contrary to popular perception, the Queen liked sex a lot. This meant she was pretty much constantly pregnant while her husband was alive.
And also, when she does get pregnant, she's really scared.
During the birth of her 7th child, she was given chloroform and loved it so much she requested it at the births of her next 2 children. Chloroform was such a controversial drug at the time that when word leaked that the Queen indulged, the population was shocked. The famous medical journal The Lancet insisted the rumors couldn't be true, but they absolutely were. Catherine the Great was one of the most famous women ever to rule a country. She governed Russia with an iron fist and did a pretty good job of it. Today, she's well known for her crazy libido, but the most famous story about her is an urban legend. She wasn't killed doing it with a horse, but she did like doing it with guys, lots of them. She wasn't as prolific as some kings, though. When she fancied someone, she stuck with him for a while before moving on to the next conquest.
We women are too much creatures of the heart, aren't we, Catherine?
Yes, Your Majesty.
However, when you're busy running one of the largest countries in the world, you don't have time to waste on men who don't measure up. Catherine didn't take any chances. According to the Poet and the Vampire, the Empress had a friend named Countess Bruce try out anyone she was thinking of having a relationship with. This made a twisted kind of sense. Catherine was so busy, she needed to know that any guy she was going to take to her bed was worth it. So Countess Bruce stepped in to be her official sex tester. The Empress of Art says that she took her role very seriously, sometimes too seriously. At least once, she was found consorting with a tryout well after he was passed on to Catherine. Marie Antoinette is probably one of the most famous queens in history. She was married to Louis XVI and lived an opulent lifestyle, at least until the point where they lost their heads. She had everything handed to her, literally. There were dozens of people following her around handing her things whenever she asked. This apparently got unbearable and she wanted a way to escape. Unfortunately, the way she chose gave the impression that she was ridiculing normal French people. First, she had a personal mini palace built on the grounds of Versailles, but it wasn't enough. She wanted a place where she could really get away, a place that made her feel like a poor person, so she built herself a fake village.
It's not too much, is it?
Modern Nation says this included 11 different cottages, as well as a lake, a watermill, a working dairy, a windmill that didn't mill anything, a barn, and various other peasant-type buildings. Marie Antoinette wasn't just half-assing this. She expected her guests to totally buy into the fantasy of being a poor farmer or whatever. Women were ordered to ditch their fancy gowns for something simple and common. She even brought her kids to learn about farming. Ultimately, her imaginary bonding with the peasant class wasn't enough to save her head, but she thought she tried. When you're Empress of the Romans, you can do pretty much whatever you want, and Valeria Messalina sure did. Her exploits were legendary, literally, as in we don't know for sure if they're true. But according to history's naughty bits, Tacitus, Suetonius, Pliny the Elder, and many more all tell the same stories about her. For example, the Empress is said to have owned a house of ill repute where ladies plied their favors for cash and she made a tiny sum out of it. Roman emperors say she even made upper-class ladies participate in the nightly goings-on.
To the health of Messalina! To the health of Messalina!
Valeria Messalina was a champ in the bedroom, according to reports. Supposedly, she frequently won contests about who could bed the most men in a night, sometimes racking up 25 conquests, which is pretty crazy if true. On the other hand, it might just be a story she passed around to keep her husband, the Emperor Claudius, in line. These days, most royal families are more style than substance. There's little chance they could order your head chopped off. Still, Queen Elizabeth II could throw her weight around when she wanted.
Thank you, Mr. Prime Minister of Canada, for making me feel so old.
The Evening Standard said she had a servant wear her new shoes for a while to break them in for her. Then there were the sandwiches. According to the Daily Beast, when Queen Elizabeth or members of her family ate sandwiches, they'd better not have crusts or corners on them. This bizarre tradition supposedly started over 150 years ago when Queen Victoria's husband, Prince Albert, decided it was bad luck to eat anything that looked even vaguely like a coffin. That meant your square sandwiches had to go. Albert has been dead a long time, but for some reason his sandwich phobia lives on. Joanna, who may not have been as mad as her name suggests, had the misfortune of marrying a hot king. Philip, also known as Philip the Handsome, knew how to control his wife, and he was a jerk about it. According to Mad Monarchs, if he got into an argument with his volatile wife, he'd leave her alone in their bedroom for days. She'd wander around her room banging on the walls, and since she was supposedly argumentative in the general, this happened a lot. It didn't help that Philip was a massive womanizer, even for a king. Once he was dead, however, he belonged only to Joanna, and she seized the moment hard. Time says that once she had her husband's dead body all to herself, she wasn't about to give it up easily. She delayed the burial, and when he was finally interred, she had his coffin opened so she could kiss his feet and make sure his body hadn't been stolen. And even though he was dead, she ordered that women be kept away from him, although it's unclear whether anyone but Joanna was interested in a formerly hot corpse. Like Joanna the Mad of Castile, Maria Eleonora of Sweden may have had serious mental health issues. At the time, she just came across like she was completely bananas. The queen knew it was her job to give birth to a son, but after several miscarriages and stillbirths, when she finally gave birth to a healthy baby, it was a slightly weird-looking baby girl. According to Mad Monarchs, her reaction was, "Instead of a son, I'm given a daughter, dark and ugly, with a great nose and black eyes. Take her from me. I will not have such a monster."
That's not nice.
And oddly, bad things kept happening to the baby. A wooden beam mysteriously fell on the cradle. Another time, she accidentally fell down the stairs. Then there was the time that a nurse dropped her straight onto a stone floor, injuring her shoulder, which remained slightly crooked for the rest of her life. Not even the king could give the poor girl a break. He raised her as a boy, but after her husband died, Maria spent the rest of her life worrying about becoming destitute, while her daughter, Queen Christina, ruled Sweden. crooked shoulder or not.
NBA action. It's fantastic. That's one of the league's old catchphrases from the 1980s, and it still rings true today. In addition to being fantastic to watch, action in the NBA can also get pretty strange, especially once the players leave the court, the crowds go home, and the lights in the arenas are switched off. The memorably named former NBA star Metta World Peace was anything but peaceful during much of his NBA career. After a 2003 loss to the Knicks, the player, formerly known as Ron Artest, destroyed a $100,000 TV camera and a monitor in Madison Square Garden. The camera's lens alone reportedly cost $60,000. Years prior, the small forward also decided to get a job at Circuit City during his rookie year in the league. It's not like he was hard up for cash, coming off a season that netted him a $1 million salary. According to him, I was bored. I was partying a little bit too much. I was trying to find ways to stay grounded. So one of the things I did was apply for a job at Circuit City. Also,
because he wanted to be able to get the employee discount.
World Peace didn't exactly work his way up to management at the company, though. In fact, he only worked a single shift. No list of weird NBA players would be complete without the man who inexplicably became the United States' #1 liaison to North Korea. Before he started hanging around with Kim Jong-un and practicing basketball diplomacy, Rodman was widely considered one of the most eccentric guys to ever play professional basketball.
I'm all of both worlds here.
During the 1996 offseason, the former power forward announced he was getting married to an unnamed person. When his wedding day finally arrived, Rodman rode around New York City dressed in a bridal gown, announcing that he had decided to marry himself before attending a book signing for his first autobiography, Bad As I Wanna Be. Rodman's other antics included dating the equally eccentric Madonna, dyeing his hair every color of the rainbow, kicking a cameraman in the crotch, and wrestling alongside Hulk Hogan. He's also spent part of his retirement years working as the commissioner for the Lingerie Football League. On top of all this, Rodman has his trips to North Korea, where he got so close to the nation's secretive ruler that he was able to call Kim Jong-un a friend for life.
Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, dear Marshall.
Once upon a time, Daryl Dawkins made smashing backboards with super awesome dunks a fairly regular habit. It was one of the things that helped him earn the nickname Chocolate Thunder.
That was the greatest dunk of all time.
Dawkins' monster jams helped push the league to replace their fragile hoops with ones that had breakaway rims and shatter-resistant backboards. Dawkins' exuberant personality and weird behavior made him hugely popular in the 1970s. He gave his dunks names like the Lookout Below, the Yo Mama,
Oh, the chocolate thunder flying, glass flying, Robazine crying, babies crying, glass still flying, cats crying, rump roast and bun toast, and thank you, wham, man, I am Jay.
and his favorite, the get out of the weighing, backboard swaying, game delaying, if you ain't grooving, you best get moving dunk.
Well, it's uncalled for. You know, it didn't have to happen, but that's Daryl Dawkins.
Dawkins passed away in 2015, but before he left, the baller routinely claimed that he was actually a space alien from the planet Lovetron, here on Earth to spread the gospel of what he called interplanetary funkmanship.
I was all of that and a bag of chips, and they just wasn't ready for it.
When you're a weird rock star, animals in unusual situations are just par for the course, whether they're hanging out in your recording studio stuffed for display or accidentally slaughtered. One of the songs on Jack White's 2018 album Boarding House Reach was based on music that Al Capone composed by hand while doing time in Alcatraz. But that weirdness was just par for the course for a guy who became famous for being in a band with his sister Meg, until it became clear that they weren't siblings but actually ex-spouses. In 2012, a reporter from the New York Times visited an industrial corner of Nashville where White had purchased a building and turned it into an office, music venue, record store, and more. On display were plenty of taxidermied animals, which White loves to collect. He even appeared on an episode of American Pickers where he purchased a taxidermied elephant head.
I really do love animals, and I love the majesty of taxidermy.
White's other odd traits include a serious dislike of nurses and an appreciation for scrapbooks from old insane asylums. Stephen Morris was the drummer for Joy Division and New Order. As it turns out, he's also notable for his collection of old tanks and armored vehicles. He actually takes them out for drives in the English countryside and has pretend battles with post office vans. He once tried to convey the draw of this hobby to a reporter from Electronic Beats by explaining, "Some people like roller coasters. It's a bit like that." It's an adrenaline thing, but it's a slow sort of adrenaline thing because they don't go very fast. Morris originally really wanted a vintage car, but his wife wasn't a fan of the idea. When he saw someone selling a tank, however, she was much more on board with that plan, although it doesn't sound like he recommends it to anyone else. As he put it, "I always wondered what it was like inside one, and now I can tell you it's not very nice." Tom DeLonge's obsession with extraterrestrials was pretty evident on Blink-182's third album, Enema of the State, which includes the track Aliens Exist. Since then, his belief in visitors from outer space has taken over his life in a big way. Not only does he own hundreds of hours of interviews with government workers who allegedly know about aliens, but he also claims to have had contact with them himself. As he told Paper Magazine in 2015, "My whole body felt like it had static electricity. It sounded like there were about 20 people there talking, and instantly my mind goes, okay, they're not here to hurt us, but they're working on something."
I think you'll start to hear the pressure building to have congressional hearings on this.
see. Okay.
DeLonge has also claimed that his phone was tapped by the government for years and that he has been contacted by scientists who know aliens are real. His efforts did help lead to the declassification of some UFO videos in 2020, and now that more people are open to the idea of UFOs being alien crafts, he's moved on to trying to prove that Bigfoot exists. In addition to his music, Prince was famous for his outrageous fashion, androgynous looks, and the time he changed his name to an unpronounceable symbol. But when it came to the enigma that was Prince, those qualities were downright banal. As an example of further weirdness, while Prince was on tour, he would bring his own hairdresser and have them rent out a local salon for his personal use. Windows were also newspapered up to keep his presence a secret, but one time when someone saw him in Washington, D.C., it almost led to a riot. This obsessive love from his fans wasn't exactly reciprocated, as Prince often sued or threatened to sue people who shared images of him or video from his concerts on blogs or social media. Prince also owned 2 doves as pets and even credited them as singers on one of his albums. They lived at his iconic Minnesota home/recording studio, Paisley Park. Perhaps the most unexpected thing Prince had in his recording studio was a swear jar, a policy that he rigorously enforced. Alice Cooper is well known for his wildly theatrical stage persona, although offstage he claims to be rather boring, especially since he stopped drinking. However, back in the day, he and his band became famous for a tragic incident involving a chicken being killed during a gig in 1969. According to legend, the crowd threw the bird on stage. Cooper tossed it back, but then the crowd proceeded to rip it apart.
I took the chicken and tossed it thinking it had feathers, it should fly. Well, it didn't fly as much as it plummeted.
Subsequent reports added ritualistic elements to the tale and claimed that Cooper himself had killed the chicken. Bassist Dennis Dunaway wrote about the incident in his memoir, and according to his telling, it turned out that the only reason there were chickens around to begin with was because the band was traveling with 2 of them. They were named Larry and Pecker, and they were treated like pets. The legend that built up around the chicken incident actually worked in the band's favor. As Dunaway recounted, "It got us off the hook with animal protection organizations, who after the chicken incident showed up at every Alice Cooper gig to prevent our murdering chickens, which we never did." Late ZZ Top bassist Dusty Hill was in showbiz for most of his life, so during a long break from touring, he once decided that the best way to keep it real would be working a manual labor job at an airport. He had to change his look, although this was before he grew out his iconic beard, so it was easier to pull off, and he also had to go by a false name in order to get away with it. Even then, some people still recognized him, but he always denied that he was famous. He ultimately seemed pretty happy with the results of his experiment. As he told Ultimate Classic Rock, "I did not want other people to think that I thought I was full of myself, but the main thing is that I didn't want to start feeling full of myself, so I did it to ground myself." Hill was no stranger to unusual jobs before this, as he and future ZZ Top bandmate Frank Beard were recruited to be part of a group that toured the United States pretending to be the British band The Zombies.
Over the years, the sport of car racing has brought in its fair share of strange people. And that's a good thing, as their crazy antics are part of what makes the sport so interesting. Let's take a look at a few of the strangest people to ever get behind the wheel of a race car. Retired NASCAR driver Tom Pistone would know a few things about cautionary measures. Pistone says when he started out, he raced on a seedy track run by a man named Andy Granatelli, who hired race car drivers specifically to crash into other cars on the course, hoping to give the audience a thrill. Coming from a place of extreme showmanship would be enough to make anyone nervous, but even by those standards, Pistone may have taken things a bit far. See, in 1960, during a qualifying run at the Daytona Speedway, fellow driver Tommy Irwin lost control of his car and crashed it into Lake Lloyd, the man-made lake at the center of the track. So during Pistone's race, he drove wearing a life preserver and an oxygen tube. You know, in case the worst happened to him. Even odd ducks got afloat. Some rules in life are easy to follow, like don't down 4 bottles of champagne while you're driving in the Indy 500, but that's exactly what one racer did. In 1913, during the 3rd Indy 500 in history, Jules Gu was in the lead after only 5 laps. During a pit stop on lap 15, he ordered some chilled wine. Records vary somewhat, but historians agree that over the next 3 pit stops he consumed between 4 and 6 bottles of champagne, or roughly 4 to 6 more bottles of champagne than a person is supposed to drink when driving a car with no safety features as fast as they can. The end result? Gu won, by a ridiculous 13 minutes. Oh, and race car drivers could no longer drink alcohol during races.
I'm too drunk to taste this chicken.
Who hasn't exaggerated a little bit on a job application? Most people have done it once or twice.
Okay, so we can wheel, we can deal, we can oversee hostile takeovers, whatever you need, bud. It's a mailroom gig.
Well, the racer you might know as Jim Rathman may have taken it a little too far. When he was young, Rathman was still going by his real name, Royal Richard Rathman. Royal wanted to go fast, but age restrictions prohibited him from doing so. According to the Indianapolis Motor Speedway's website, he swapped IDs with his older brother Jim and entered a stock car race.
He was 3 years older than I was, and he was satisfied with his driver's license, so that's how I got started driving, and I just kept the name of Jim from then on.
He later became an Indy 500 champion and one of the most influential racers of his generation, albeit one with the wrong date of birth listed on his records. At some point or another, we've all had a special collection of things, but Dale Earnhardt Jr. might have the most bizarre collection of all. While your standard gearhead might have a project car or two, and maybe a shelf covered in Hot Wheels, Earnhardt prefers a more life-sized and objectively weird hobby. He owns a car wreck graveyard.
Forget Disneyland. Welcome to Hillbilly Heaven.
Yes, Dale Jr.'s equivalent to a stack of comic books is a stretch of land called Dirty Mo Acres, containing dozens of derelict race cars. In it, you can find the remains of such vehicles as a Jimmy Johnson number 48, Will Power's number 12 Indy car, which now resides in a tree, and one of Earnhardt's own number 8 cars, which he told NASCAR.com he uses for target practice. No respect for the dead. Dale Jarrett started his career in racing at the bottom. His father managed a racetrack in North Carolina and gave a teenage Dale a job running errands and performing menial tasks around the property. One of his chores was cutting the lawn on the makeshift grass parking lot. So Dale made what we can all agree was his only logical decision. He traded a golf club for a couple of goats and set them loose on the grass.
Thank you for the goat, my friend.
The problem was, the goats weren't into grass, but they apparently went wild for the upholstery inside a series of decorative wrecked vehicles sitting in the lot. Dale later said, all they would eat was the upholstery in the cars and the vinyl tops. They wouldn't eat grass if you put it in their mouths. Who hasn't wanted a pet monkey at some point? Tim Flock certainly has. But what separates the greats like Flock from the rest of us? Flock did something about it. For 8 glorious races in 1953, Tim Flock drove with a rhesus monkey named Jocko Flocko as his co-pilot. Flock even got a little racing suit tailored for the monkey. What does a monkey do in a race car, you might wonder? You know, monkey stuff. On their 8th race together, Jocko managed to open up a trap door in the bottom of the car and then jumped onto Flock's back. Tim Flock pulled over and unloaded the monkey with his pit crew, and that was the end of Jocko's joyriding days.